but it reminds me of the mother who had two sons. One went off to sea, the other became a lieutenant governor, and neither were ever heard from again.
Okay.
Anyway, um, oh, let me do this. And of course, I'm not in the starting spot here from the beginning. Okay, what I'm going to describe for you today is my own personal journey, which, in a sense is not over yet. I hope I still have a number of things left to do in my life. And I like to not be too pompous about this because it's been in some ways a rather average life. But I do come from what can only be described as the most modest of beginnings. Uh, First of all, I'm a bastard. Now, many of you might have called me that for one reason or the other, but in my case, it's literally true. I was born out of wedlock, and fortunately, I had loving grandparents who adopted me, and therefore I grew up with older parents as an only child, which had a lot of advantages along with the problems that go with that. Grew up on a small family farm in northwestern Minnesota, literally close enough so if I stood on my tiptoes, I could see North Dakota about a mile away. I was a small family farm kid then, and I'm still one today, at least in heart. Uh, Today, what our living would be called poor, but we didn't know that it was poor because everyone was pretty much living the same way. But it was pretty modest kind of living. We had, when I look back now as having been a lifetime educator, our schools were very poor, very inadequate schools. But I was gifted with a curiosity then and a great deal of curiosity now. Now, I didn't think this was unusual while I was doing it, but when I was a junior in high school, they took us to a local college and I saw Macbeth performed, a Shakespearean play. Well, that aroused my curiosity, and so I had to go home and I had to read every single one of Shakespeare's plays from front to back. Also, when I was in the sixth grade, I happened, because my last name begins with W, to sit at the very back of the room in the farthest seat, which happened to be right next to the encyclopedias. And as the year went by, I read the entire encyclopedia. Didn't think it was unusual, but it was just my curiosity. And also in our little high school, for some odd reason, there was a Quran. And so I wound up looking at and reading the Quran. Didn't understand it very well, but at least that was part of what I was curious about. In my life, I've been gifted to engage in what I can only call possibility thinking, coupled with a great imagination. I have always had the idea that if it didn't say you couldn't do it, I have the possibility that it can happen. And so I've grabbed hold of some experiences that others might have avoided. This is the farm I grew up on, a 240-acre farm in northwestern Minnesota. Varied. We had chickens and pigs and cows, and we had raised wheat and barley and oats and corn and a whole variety of things. It was and so that's where it was. This is what little Lou looked like when he was 3 years old. That's with my first dog, Patsy. And as I got into, I suppose it was about sixth grade or so, and then maybe a little bit later. Um, During my politically formative years, Eisenhower was the main president. Now, I had some consciousness of Harry Truman, but it was really Eisenhower that I began to be influenced by because I thought he was just absolutely fantastic. And so to this day, I describe myself as having started out at least as an Eisenhower Republican. By the way, most of you know I am no longer a Republican for a whole lot of reasons, but that's another story for later. Well, so what is an Eisenhower Republican? Pretty much that's somebody who's an internationalist, a fiscal conservative, and a relative social progressive, or sort of liberal at least. We had in our little town the 9th Congressional District Chairwoman, Frances Erickson. and she organized a teenage Republican club. And so I found myself in my 16, 17 years old running to all kinds of Republican conventions and activities and fundraising and going door to door and all kinds of things. And so that was a very formative kind of an activity. Then when I got to college, I was a college Republican. And I became president of our university's college Republican club. That meant that this was in North Dakota, by the way. So then I got to go to the state conventions and participated in a lot of activity that I would otherwise not have had a chance to try. In college, I was my fraternity's president. I was on the university student council, very active in theater. I acted in many, many different plays, and in a sense, government and politics is theater, and so it was a training for that in a sort of way. I was on the debate squad, and that too was very formative in terms of the things I later would have to do. I do remember at one time when he was campaigning in 1960 for the presidency, Nixon came to our city and our university. And so because I was head of the college Republicans, I organized a great big reception for him, and we were managed to get out several thousand people to listen to Nixon. My early career path is I stayed in college and I finished a master's degree before I went out to work. Then my first job was as a social studies teacher in a small progressive town called Granite Falls, Minnesota. By the end of the first year, in addition to teaching, they had made me a part-time assistant principal. And so I was started on the administrative track. After 2 years there, I moved to the little town of Cosmos, Minnesota, and I was a high school principal. Now, this is a very tiny high school with only about 230 students in it, but it's a beginning. I then returned to the university and completed my doctorate. And I was by then I moved to Worthington, Minnesota, in southwestern Minnesota, where I was an assistant superintendent, their first assistant superintendent. While I was in Worthington in Nobles County, I became the independent Republican county party chair. And that had a minor influence on the things that were going to happen later on. From there, after 2 years, I moved to Bemidji, Minnesota. Bemidji, Minnesota, in the North Country, and the school district that I was superintendent of. First of all, I was the youngest superintendent of a school district in outstate Minnesota. I don't know, like actually in all of Minnesota at that time. It was a large school district. It was about the same size as the state of Rhode Island. Our school buses ran about 1 million miles a year. And I was a very hands-on superintendent. There I am. And this was in 1975. My hair was still black at that point. And I used to get out in the schools as much as I could. And here I am reading to a kindergarten class. And a little explanation. Minnesota does not have a Democratic Party. It has a Democratic Farmer Labor Party, the DFL, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. So why? Just after World War I, there was a great populist movement in America, and out of that came a new political party, the Farmer Labor Party. It was not Democratic at all. It was the Farmer Labor Party, and the Democrats were a separate party and the Republicans were a separate party. During the 1920s in Minnesota, the Republicans dominated state politics. In the 1930s, the Farmer Labor Party dominated politics, with the Democrats a distant third. Then in the 1940s, a guy came out of South Dakota, and he became a professor, first of all, at the University of Minnesota, and then Minneapolis mayor, and his name was Hubert Humphrey. And he didn't like that the Democrats kept losing. And so in the mid-40s, he engineered a merger of the Democrats and the Farmer Labor Party into the DFL, and that's what they remain to this day. Sometime around 1970, and I can't remember the exact year and the sequence, but after the Republicans had lost election after election and got tired of it, they decided maybe if we renamed our party, it would then compete with this DFL. And so Minnesota's party during my time in politics there was the Independent Republican Party. And I've always kind of valued that independent label that I bore when I was serving in office and running for office. The first real overt entry was in the 7th Congressional District, a 7th Congressional District in Minnesota. You can see there it is, the northwestern corner, and there's the county I was in, Beltrami County. We were dominated by a good Democratic congressman. He had been there for quite a while. It looked like he was going to be there for quite a while into the future. But in 1976, a man by the name of Jimmy Carter is elected president. And what does he do? He calls upon our congressman, Bob Berglund, to be his Secretary of Agriculture. And so all of a sudden, there's a special election. And my friends in the party in Beltrami County, they pushed me, literally. They put me in a car and took me to the television stations in the area so I could declare my candidacy. I was part of a group of about 10 who were running for the congressional seat, and it ultimately was won by the man who beat me. But there were 10 of us, and I came in second to the man who was going to go on to be our congressman. I made a lot of friends in that race, and I got a lot of encouragement then that I should run for something else. Well, something else in 1978 turned out to be the lieutenant governor race. And so I threw my hat into the ring and I ran all over the state to special forums in the party, and I talked to thousands of people in the Republican Party, independent Republican Party. Eventually, I was successful in beating a state senator from Rochester, which is a very Republican area. So I became then the lieutenant governor candidate. As one of the brochures that was out there, I was digging through my old files here and came across this. Notice that slogan at the bottom, "He will make Minnesota work again," sounds sort of like the former president's slogan. I was told that labeled as having an old-fashioned campaign, and it was. I shook so many hands, you will not believe it, but I actually had calluses built up in the corner between my thumb and forefinger. I had shaken so many hands, and I actually got tendonitis in my arm from shaking hands, and it was quite an experience. And I'd never campaigned for anything before in my whole life, so it was a real education for me. Sounds good. Aggressive, decisive, responsive. So now we had an interesting thing that happens in 1978. Now, in order to understand this time, you need to remember this is not long after Watergate. And so the Republican Party, just after Watergate, was in disarray and discredited. But the DFL, the Democratic Farmer Labor, they had a credibility problem in 1978. First of all, in 1976, if you'll recall, Senator Mondale from Minnesota was elected as vice president along with Carter. And so the governor at that time, Governor Wendell Anderson, he resigned his governorship so that Lieutenant Governor Perpich could assume the governorship, and he appointed him as the unelected senator. Perpich, therefore, had moved up and he became the unelected governor. Alec Olson at that time had been the Minnesota Senate president, and he became automatically the unelected lieutenant governor. Early in 1978, Senator Humphrey died. And guess what? Muriel Humphrey is appointed as the unelected senator. So here's what the DFL has. It has all of these unelected top officials in 1978. And so there was a billboard, a big black billboard that was run all over the state of Minnesota. And it said, "A funny thing is going to happen to the DFL in November. It's called an election." And this had a tremendous impact on the election in 1978. I was on the campaign trail, and there you see me with my former wife. There I am with who was later going to be Senator Durenberger and my former wife. She played a key role, by the way. She's quite a lady, even though we are certainly no longer together. Then in 1978, victories. We as independent Republicans, we won the Mondale Senate seat. Senator Rudy Boschwitz won that one. We won the Humphrey Senate seat. David Durenberger won that one. The governorship was won by Al Quie, and I won the lieutenant governorship. Also, the state auditor, Arnie Carlson, was elected. And so we had a sweep. And all of this only 4 years after the disgrace of Watergate. It was pretty sweet. Inauguration, January 3rd, 1979. There I am. That's my aunt and her husband on the left, and the governor and his wife on the other side, along with my former wife. And here we are, my campaign. This lady that I'm kissing is the lady who made possible my first run for Congress. Oh, quite an experience. Quite an experience. It's hanging on the wall here. I just took a picture of it, and so it's not a very good picture, but this is my certificate of election from 1978. And this is my official portrait. Now, again, this is a picture of a picture, so the actual picture is a little clearer than this. But if you really want one of these, I think I have 500 of them on a shelf somewhere in the garage. And you can see, as you know me today, the difference. Age does make a difference. So, okay, so here I am. This country boy has become lieutenant governor. So what the hell do you do? Well, first of all, I chaired a lot of boards and commissions. I was chairman of the Area Architectural and Planning Board for the state capitol. I was on the Upper Great Lakes Regional Commission. I chaired the Rural Development Council. I was on the State Historical Board. I can't even remember all of them. There were a lot of them, and I was busy all the time. I also was a chief lobbyist for the governor, especially with the Republicans in the Senate, where I had quite a bit of influence on what they were going to do. Now, if you want to know how things operate, you need to follow the money. And I decided immediately that if I wanted to understand state government, it might be good to immerse myself in financial things. Now, the way a budget is put together is the governor's office first holds a series of hearings where all the state agencies make presentations. Those then become the governor's budget that they propose to the legislature. Well, I chaired those finance hearings so that every department of government, one after the other, came in and made their pitch for whatever amount of support they needed in order to have that during the next biennium. So I learned a lot about government that way. I happened to be kind of interested in ideas, and so I was kind of a policy wonk kind of person. And I love to envision what can happen, what are the possibilities. And so I was excited about all of that and played as much of a role in that as possible and advised the governor. By the way, especially because I had been a superintendent of schools, I gave a lot of policy advice on education matters, which is a big part of support, financial support in any state. And I happened to be very close to the governor and was constantly advising him. And ultimately, then about halfway through the term, he named me as his chief of staff, or increased my amount of power and influence. And of course, I represented the state. I remember in the very beginning, we got 12 or 1,300 invitations a month to do things, to go to this event or that event and so forth. And it was exhausting. We tried to cover as many of them as we could, but I would often go to 4 or 5 of them in one evening from one hotel to the other, where I would go in and give greetings for the state. And I tell you, it's quite a thrilling thing when you walk into a room and you have 1,000 convention attendees stand up just because you walked into the room. Now, I had to quickly keep reminding myself they were not standing up for Lou Wongberg. They were standing up out of respect for the state and the position. But it was an interesting thing. And I gave hundreds of speeches. I have no count of how many I gave. And if you really want to listen to them, I've got a lot of them recorded too. But it's interesting to go back and listen to them. This is me with the governor. This is me sitting on the governor's desk. This was our campaign brochure from, I don't remember which year we were using this, but it was used during this time. And then I was chief of staff. and along with the other things that I was continuing to do. So it was kind of a balancing act as to how do I get all of these things to happen. But there were no days when I was bored, and there were no days when I was not very, very busy doing something. Also, I was an object of humor. I ultimately, and you're going to see a few of them here, I think there were 25 or so cartoons featuring me, especially during the year I ran for election. The one, if you can't read this, I'll read them for you. The one on the left, two guys in a canoe, it says, "Can you believe this? Al Quie is named Lou Wongberg as one of his top aides." The second panel says, "As his chief of staff yet, that's a position of responsibility." And the first guy says, "Who?" And the other guy says, "Al Quie." And the other one says, "No, I meant the other guy, Lou Wongberg. He's lieutenant governor." And the first guy says, "Does Al Quie know that?" Uh, anyway, I had this idea that we needed to get our act out to rural Minnesota. And so we embarked on a program that I sponsored called Capital for a Day. And what we would do is go to some city in outstate Minnesota and declare it to be capital for a day. Most of the commissioners would go out there, as well as the governor and myself, and then we would hold hearings and we would hold various kinds of events, and we talk on their local media, and it gave them a chance to get more visibility and to get their ideas considered in government. It was my privilege to know an awful lot of political leaders during this time. And this is not an exhaustive list, but a few samplings. I was very, very close with Senator Terry Sanford. I went to China with him. We became very close. He was senator from North Carolina, but he'd been governor before that and president of Duke University. I was a friend and served on a committee with Senator Edward Brooke from Massachusetts, I believe the first black congressman since the Civil War. I also was a friend with Secretary of State Ed Muskie, was also on a committee with him. I got to know Julian Bond, state senator at that time in Georgia, later head of the NAACP. Also got to know a little bit Leonard Woodcock, former head of the AFL-CIO, who was Carter's ambassador to China. Jack Kemp was a close personal friend of mine. And I also had delightful times with Speaker Tip O'Meara, this wonderful Irishman, so full of humor and good grace. You just couldn't help but love this big teddy bear of a man, and he was just a joy to be around. And I got to know, now I have literally shaken the hand of every man who has been president, from Harry Truman up through George W. Bush. I have not shaken hands with Obama, Trump, or our current, well, I may have met Biden along the way, but I don't recall it right now, as a matter of fact. But here I am with Jerry Ford. I remember sitting behind him and I was counting the hairs on his half bald head. And here I am with H.W. Bush. This is the Roosevelt room in the White House. There are two meeting rooms that are used by the president. One, of course, is the cabinet room, which is larger. And then right close to the Oval Office, this is the Roosevelt room. I was vice chair of the National Conference of Lieutenant Governors. And so on one of our meetings in Washington, we were invited to the White House, and here we are meeting in the Roosevelt room. While I'm sitting here, Ed Meese started the meeting. He was then the chief of staff, and he was there for about the first 15 minutes. And then the president came in to join us. And the president, if you can, my pointer, that is President Reagan. Along the side of the wall over to the right from here, there were a series of chairs, and there was a stenographer with the stenographer pad sitting there. And as the president came through, his knee bumped the chair and these pads fall on the floor. And so I look over from where I am, and that's me right there. And I see the president of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, down on his hands and knees picking up these pads. And I thought it was just kind of a heartwarming moment. And I was with Reagan many, many times. And as a person, forgetting any philosophy or policies. He was a delightful man, told these wonderful, wonderful jokes and stories. I got to know numerous celebrities. Among those was Carol Channing. I shared a stage with her, and the one thing I can clearly recall is how dirty her costume was around the neck. I knew and had spent some time with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. I had lunch with Susan Sullivan from Falcon Crest. And I was with Dorothy Hamill. She was in some appearance. I was at a meeting that was honoring Bobby Hull, and I'm seated at the head table, and I'm not a sports fan. I don't know. I'm there to just represent the state. I didn't even know who Bobby Hull was, but there he was. Also, we had a cooking contest once, and I shared a cooking kitchen with Arlene Dahl. Arlene Dahl is one of these interesting celebrities. People have said, what is Arlene Dahl famous for being a celebrity for? And she's famous for being famous. And then I shared the stage at one time with Bob Hope also, and got to know him a little bit. Very, very warm kind of a man too. And he's pretty much the same personally as he is on stage. I met with or had dinner with the King of Norway. Now, it's a big deal. I'm the great grandson of Norwegian immigrants who came in poverty, extreme poverty, to the United States. And then to have an opportunity to have dinner with the King of Norway. The thing that amuses me when I think back on the experience, though, he was about 80 years old at that point, and he managed to fall asleep part of the way through the dinner. Also a dinner at one point with the King of Sweden, Carl Gustaf. And also, I didn't have dinner with her, but I had a meeting with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Thatcher, on a special mission that we had there, and many, many others. Too many to actually mention. Campaigning never ends. I was at every day of the Minnesota State Fair, and that's the second largest fair in the world of a state fair in the United States. Only the Texas Fair is larger. And there too, you meet an awful lot of people. That's where you mix with the masses come there. So Governor Quee, frankly, was not all that great a governor. He had financial troubles in terms of managing the state budget. 7 special sessions took place in 1980, 81, because they never could quite get it right. And so he was looking at a dismal reelection campaign in 1982. And so in January of 1982, right in the middle of a blizzard, he decided to not run for reelection. And this is a cartoon that shows how his campaign was not going anywhere. It was stuck in the snow, and he's saying, the heck with it, he's not going to run. So all of a sudden then, I'm under a lot of pressure. Should I run for governor? Many were calling and pushing and trying to organize me to get going and so forth, and it wasn't universal, but I had a lot of people who loved me and thought that I should run for governor. And so I did. I launched my campaign probably around the 1st of February or so of 1982. I was an underdog, and I knew I was an underdog from the beginning, partly because of Quee. I was associated with Quee, and he was, he had all kinds of fiscal problems. But I roared into the race. We got off to a fast start. We had things well organized. I had good supporters and so forth. And so we were off to a great beginning. And this is how the cartoonist portrayed me, the Lou Wongberg machine. Look at that. We're off and running. But that honeymoon was going to be fairly brief. All they had to choose from, according to Sack, who's still doing cartoons for the Minneapolis Tribune, was my name. That wasn't going to last. I did have lots of support. Durenberger, the senator, was supporting of me. All of the Republican congressmen were supporting me. I had a lot of support. But others were coveting the seat as well. Part of my problem is name recognition. Who the heck is this guy anyway? As I told you with a joke at the beginning, lieutenant governors do disappear. So we had a slowdown. I had to shake Quee's shadow. Uh, Many of the IR caucuses now begin displaying a wait and see attitude. The bandwagon was not moving very fast. Just out of curiosity, this is the bumper sticker that we had that year. Lots of those were hopefully stuck all over the state. 1982 team, we were successful in getting the endorsement, though, finally. There were, I think, 8 or 10 candidates who were vying for the endorsement, and ultimately, a tough race, we beat them. Took until about 1:30 in the morning in our convention for that to happen. That's David Durenberger, the senator, on the left. That's my former wife. I'm in the middle. That's Jim Lindow. He had been former mayor of the largest suburb of Minneapolis, Bloomington, and his wife, and then a young man who was running for state treasurer, I believe. I don't even remember his name now. The endorsement victory. IRs choose the ticket of Wongberg Lindow, but the thing that's revealing on this is that secondary headline, Wongberg's bland style decisive. So I'm just too much of an old reserved Norwegian to get everybody excited, I guess. And so anyway, they called my style bland. So I did mix with the big guys. This is a meeting where Reagan came to town. That's Reagan right in the middle. This particular picture, I believe, appeared in Newsweek. It was it was another one of the occasions when I got to spend a little quiet time backstage with Reagan and to get to know him as a person. And so that was kind of a special privilege. The Quee problem. This cartoon shows how I was having that overshadowing problem about identification with Quee. So I made a gamble on one time. We needed to have a handshaking event with Reagan. And so Reagan was going to have an appearance in Des Moines, Iowa. And so we tried to get people to arrange for me to go down and to meet with him. And so we got a plane and I flew down to Des Moines, Iowa, but we had started too late. And so I didn't get to meet the president, but I got a lovely airplane trip to Des Moines and back, not seeing anyone. So the campaign stalled. Note here they have my campaign in neutral, the Wongberg campaign in neutral. I've always been amused at the way they caricature you when they take your picture. This is that name recognition problem. So tell Mr. Wang Bug, I mean Wang Bird, Wing Ding, Wing Wang, Wig Bag, Wang Bang, Wing, and so forth. Any luck with your name recognition problem? And the answer is no, I didn't have much luck with that. Finally, the voters said, get lost. I was done. I lost the election. In order for me to win, I needed a special set of circumstances to come together, and they just did not happen that year. And so you are done. But they left me with a little goodbye present, a campaign debt. And if you want to talk about something awful, try to retire a campaign debt when you've lost the election. It was $207,000 in November of 1982, which equals 550,000 plus today if we were able to, inflation has done that to dollars since then. So. Yes, but I was left with incredible experiences. I started out as a bastard then, and I'm a bastard now. I'll let you take that wherever you want to. I was a small family farm kid then, and I'm still, those origins are still with me. But I've had my 15 minutes of fame. I learned a lot, and I have rich, wonderful memories. After all of this ended, I spent about almost 3 years as a Fortune 500 executive. And then 36 years ago, this spring, I came to Florida and I first bought a business that I ran for about a dozen years. I owned a group of adult vocational training schools. And then when I retired from that, I tried a couple of other things, including trying to sell real estate, which I discovered I'm no salesman. But anyway, eventually became a professor and spent my last about 18 years teaching in a couple of institutions. And I happily live in the present, and I value my friends and activities that are going on now. Now, what I'm going to do is a little bit of a change of pace here. I wrote something some years ago that I think you will find interesting, and I'm going to describe one campaign experience in particular. So we had a summer of fun in 1982. Let me just share this with you. I've been in about every community in Minnesota, and most several times. Each one, understandably, has a whole lot of civic pride, and this has led to a proliferation of summer celebrations. The intent of these events is to capture some uniqueness of a piece of geography or ethnic heritage and transform it into a moneymaker for the local merchants. If some folks get to have a good time in the process, then so much the better. I was assigned to do the county fair circuit, and I managed to get to nearly 40 in one season. And that doesn't count being at every day of the state fair for its 12-day run. In addition, I went to rodeos, tractor pulls, and old timers reunions. There were sub gatherings of Norwegians, Swedes, Germans, Finlanders, and of course the Irish. The churches held potlucks and ice cream socials. Every river town had some kind of river days. In the woods, there were variations on lumberjack themes. There are a host of water carnivals growing out of the 10,000 lakes that Minnesota prizes so highly. There's a fisherman's picnic in Grand Marais, horse plowing in Litchfield, Heritage Fest in New Ulm, Raspberry Days in Hopkins, which has no raspberries, Boxcar Days in Tracy, I never understood that one, Turkey Day in Worthington, which no longer has turkeys, and far too many others to even remember. Every event was an excuse for a parade. Now, much of it now blends together. In spite of each town's very best efforts to create a genuinely unique celebration, they were strangely the same. But the one that stood out dramatically was held in the unlikely little village of Jasper, Minnesota. That singular event was the Jasper Goat Race. Jasper needed an idea for a summer civic celebration. After one particularly frustrating session of the planning committee, Frank Swanson from the JCs shot off his mouth and said, "By God, we've been fighting this thing around for weeks, and all you guys do is knock down every idea before you even hear what it is. What's your creativity? Where's your leadership? You come up with something then, Frank." Frank looked chagrined, but after his tirade, he had no choice but to accept their challenge. No one in the committee was a fool, and they could sense that passing the buck was an easy way out of an impasse. In moments, the motion passed and the meeting adjourned. There was a smug look on a couple of faces because they didn't believe the JCs were anything but hard-drinking blowhards who talked a better game than they produced. At the next meeting, Frank cleared his throat with the cheerleader enthusiasm and said, "I've got an idea that will knock your socks off." He paused to build suspense, noting with satisfaction the curiosity of the committee members. "We're going to have the event of the year. We're going to have something no one else has. In fact, we're going to have something no one has ever seen." The committee looked puzzled. "Yes, sir, we're going to make history. We here in little old Jasper are going to sponsor the first and only world-class goat race." Homer said, "Darn it, Frank. Still and say I've never heard of goats racing. How the heck does it work?" Frank said, "I couldn't figure that out until I got to talking. You match two goats up in a narrow fenced alley, and the winner of each heat is paired up with the other winners until all of the goats are raced and one winner is left." Campaigns are crazy. They're organized by professionals, but executed by amateurs. Things fall through the cracks. We had a frantic campaign schedule. Day after day, the candidate, that was me, and the driver for the day were handed a list of places, events, and contacts. The mindless itinerary of where to go and who to meet each day finally began to scroll mindlessly in front of my eyes. I stopped trying to think very hard. Then I arrived at the gate of the Jasper Goat Race totally unprepared. Several characters prepared to play a role in this moment in my life. Jack Thomas was a pretty good man. He loved his wife Bernice and his two young children. Jack worked hard as the foreman for a small construction company that specialized in building silos and grain storage towers on the area farms. He didn't care much for church or things at the school. His work kept him away from home some part of each week, so no one much expected him to show up. When in town, he hung out at Henry's old-time bar. Jack liked his beer, pool, and bar friends. Mostly he was a quiet drinker, and early in the evening he had a fairly good eye with the pool cue. As the night passed and the steady eye blurred, and any money he might have earned was equaled by his losses. Ada Mae Larson was in charge of everything. Even her parents learned at an early age that they were to be directed and organized by their daughter. While not a stunning beauty, in high school she managed to mold her mildly plump figure with ample breasts into clothing that complemented her appearance, partly through well-planned flirtation and the rest through intimidation. She was the homecoming queen, and she never let anyone forget it. It took Ada Mae nearly 3 years to lasso and tie up Walt Larson. In the process of constructing a life for Walt, she became a first-rate cook. Irritable, groaned at each meal with both appealing taste and more than generous quantity. Fortunately, Walt was one of those kind of guys who can eat a lot, but work hard and burn it all off. Ada wasn't built in the same way, and as they say, she became an easy keeper. Along the way, she bore 5 children, and with each pregnancy added more and more pounds to her ample girth. By the time of the Jasper goat race, Ada weighed in at something well over 200 pounds. Even with her expanded size, she never let loose of the idea that having been homecoming queen made her more than just a little bit prettier than the average, even though she acknowledged to close friends that she had put on a pound or two. She always wore a stout girdle to hold it all together and force it into the shape she wanted. Ada couldn't resist letting the tops of her generous breasts show a little, and so the neckline of her dresses were generally low cut. When Jasper was founded nearly a century ago on the prairie, the forefathers thought they had a great future, and they made the streets wider than most. The ambitions were never realized, however, and the main street of Jasper was mainly 1 block long. There were a couple of stores in the next block, but all the important stuff was in that single block. To control admission to the goat race, a wood lath fence was erected across both ends of the street with a small entry where tickets would be collected. The tickets were sold at tables outside the gates. The sidewalk area north of the race course was roughly divided in two, with about 2/3 of the area which held a small stage for a band and a wood dance floor in front. The remainder of the sidewalk was filled with senior crafts and handicraft booths. The various nursing homes and clubs displayed their rugs, crocheting, carving, and other bric-a-brac for sale. The crowded south sidewalk groaned with the overabundance of homemade foods and the booths of the Lutheran women, Catholic ladies, and Methodist mothers. Each woman did her best to show off her best pastries, pies, cakes, and cookies. The men's commercial club offered more substantial hot dogs, beans, and fries. The rest of the south side of the street set the tone for the whole gathering. That was where the JCs set up their beer stand. It was large and well stocked. The lumberyard loaned stock watering tanks that they filled with ice, water, and beer cans. Even though the committee thought they had asked the right questions, there were a few elements about a goat race they failed to fully understand. You see, goats aren't given to competitive running through instinct, and it takes a bit of trickery to get them to do their thing. If the desperate committee had pressed for answers, they might not have approved the idea. As it was, they just took it for granted that somehow goats must be able to race. Horses race, dogs race, and so the mental leap to goats racing was only a small one. The goat runway was about 200 feet long and just wide enough for 2 goats to run side by side. The woven wire fencing on the side was sturdy enough to prevent a determined goat from butting his way out into the crowd, but open enough so everyone could see the action. Only the male or billy goats raced. Uh, and You see, the incentive at the other end of the raceway was a female or nanny goat who was in the mood for love. The winning billy goat got to have his way with a nanny as his reward for running fast. In the furious planning, no one had anticipated what to do with the empty beer cans. The drinkers dropped them one by one, and in short order, they overflowed the gutters, filling the street from curb to curb. The increasingly drunken farmers who gathered around the beer stands noisily stumbled and shuffled through the metal debris. It was this scene that I unsuspectingly entered. I came around the corner of the slatted fence and was in the middle of everything all at once. Being somewhat clumsy by nature, the first thing that happened was that I entangled my feet in the gutter full of beer cans and I tripped. In tripping, I bumped into Jack Thomas. By this time, he was completely inebriated. With great difficulty, he turned, frowned, and grabbed me by my shirt front and pulled me towards him as he drew back his arm to land a serious rearrangement to my face. In Jack's unsteadiness, however, the act of pulling his arm back overstrained his sense of balance, and he slowly fell backwards. Since he was gripping my shirt collar tightly, I came along with him, landing face down on top of Jack in the middle of the beer cans in the gutter. On the way down, our combined weight lurched into the broad backside of big Elmer G. Sunberg. Elmer had filled his fifth paper plate completely to overflowing with food. This time he had taken a particularly generous helping from the Methodist mothers of juicy baked beans, potato salad, cherry jello, and chicken legs. The sudden blow to his back was sufficient to cause him to lose the plate of food. It lifted forward with a pretty good force. The plate turned over just once in midair and landed with a noisy plop exactly between Ada Mae Larson's ample breasts. A sizable chicken bone lodged between her bosoms and stuck up like a candle on a birthday cake. Ada Mae was momentarily shocked by the sudden assault, and she looked down at the mess with the upthrust bone. From deep within her large carcass there arose a scream that could be heard 3 counties away. At the same time, she backed away until Ada Mae's ample behind encountered the Catholic lady's pastry table, and she sat right down on a whole tray of strawberry tarts and half a Lady Baltimore cake just before the entire table gave way and collapsed, sending the delicate pastries in every direction. Since the tables were crowded so closely, a chain reaction followed, and every food table was bumped into disarray. The women working behind the tables were startled, and the ensuing noise was rather like a chicken house when a dog runs through the middle. Just as Ada Mae was about to scream, E. Burt Nelson was opening the goat pen for another heat. It drew his attention away from the task for a moment, and one of the quickest goats bolted through the opening and buttered E. Burt aside, leaving the gate wide open. Now the other goats saw their opportunity and took it. In the flash of an eye, there were goats running and jumping everywhere. They leaped and ran through the handicrafts, the remains of the food stands, and behind the beer stand. After a moment of total shock, some of the men began grabbing and running down goats. Most missed the wily escapees and fell in their failure. The first goat captured got loose again. One old Billy came running through with twin crocheted doilies on his horns and a pair of knitted booties hung around his neck. Another goat got to one of the nannies, and in the middle of the chaos, they engaged in passionate lovemaking. The women took turns wailing and screaming. A few goats were recaptured, and there were signs that the scene was getting back under control. Ada Mae was in the process of regaining her dignity and cleaning the mess off her bosom and clothing. A big black Billy that was still free saw a tempting new target, took aim, and butted her full force in the ample behind. A new screech she emitted as she flew forward into the arms of stern Pastor Emil Torgerson as the whole scene descended into chaos. The old Doc Bob tuba band had been keeping a few blocks busy, a few folks busy at the stand. Their music abruptly stopped, and with frantic movement, and some of the old band members hadn't used in years, and they tried to keep their instruments from harm. One of the small billies headed full force through the big bass drum. All of this took only a few moments to unfold. It seemed like an eternity to me as I struggled to free from my new friend, Jack Thomas. He was heavy, however, and he had me pinned down. The chaos distracted him enough, so he released his grip on my shirt, and we both attempted to regain some composure. He squinted his bleary eyes, looked closely at me, and he said, "You know, you got pretty nice eyes." And then he kissed me. I will never forget my brush with the Jasper goat race. I have no idea whether they've ever held another one or not. I do not know, and I never went back to find out. I don't think I got many votes out of the county, and it's just as well because I didn't know then, and I don't know now what kind of leadership to provide to the home of the world's largest goat race. Okay, so all right. So anyway, that is that story. And let me go a little bit further here. Now, if you have a moment, and we're still okay time-wise, so these are some of the reasons why I lost the election. I'm going to show you a sampling of some of the television commercials that were prepared for my campaign in 1982, and you'll be able to tell how terrible they are, and that's why part of the reason I did not get elected.
The state of Minnesota has the honor of being the one state chosen to pilot a new national youth program, the Congressional Award. Established by an act of Congress in 1979, the Congressional Award is the nation's highest recognition of the initiative, achievement, and voluntary service of the country's youth. It is a partnership that reinforces.
All right, let's move on to some more here. I'm not going to show you all of these, but you get a sampling of them at least.
A little bit about the great future that I think this state can have. With the commitment to high technology and new approaches to doing business, we can build upon our industrial know-how to diversify and create new jobs, not only for the Northeast, but for all of Minnesota. Down there are the best farmers and the best land in the country. We know how to produce food, but our farmers need help finding new and stable markets for that grain. And we can find working solutions to increase our tourist dollar. One of our most important resources is our children. Our biggest responsibility is to give them a good education and a solid opportunity. You know, Minnesota.
Now, I'll tell you that that helicopter never got more than 2 feet off the ground. So.
Have a great future ahead of them. The governor committed to working solutions to ensure that kind of future. That's the kind of strong leadership I'm committed to deliver.
Let's see. Here's a little. This was my former wife doing one, and that was pretty cool. So. Now, I was, my son John is the oldest son, and as you, if any of you have experience with teenagers, we had a lot of conflict between that son and myself. And so this particular commercial made being parenting all worthwhile.
Be 22 days too young. But if I could vote, I know he's the person I'd want to be governor of Minnesota. When he's home, he doesn't talk about his work much, but I know how much it means to him. Bring jobs, tourism, and things like that to the state. I'm not old enough to vote yet, but if you are, please vote for my dad, Lou Wongberg. He'll be as good a governor as he is a dad.
That affirmation made the whole campaign worthwhile, I can tell you.
Lou Wongberg for governor.
A couple more to show you here, and then we'll be done with this. So.
And now some of the best crops in the whole world.
The thing that's kind of fun, this is the lieutenant governor candidate, Jim Lindow, with me. And the corn is significant because that's where I'm holding the microphones.
It's like this corn. Now, this corn is going to be ready for market in about 2 months, but when the farmer takes it to market, I'm afraid he's going to be disappointed. Well, there's no question but what that, as governor and lieutenant governor, to make sure that if the Minnesota farmer produces it, there's an international market where he can sell it.
Okay, that's a couple more.
The growth of government, to redo our tax laws, to reduce the enormous burden of regulation, to provide incentive programs for new jobs. This state needs leadership. It needs working solutions for Minnesota's future. I'm confident I can provide that kind of leadership, and that's why I'm running for governor. I want working solutions to their problems. They care a lot about the future. They want things to be better. The people are great. They expect great leadership, and that's what I intend to do as governor of the state of Minnesota. That level of commitment, that's what I'd like to bring as governor. Together that will move us.
Coming up might represent the governor's position.
Well, you get an idea anyway. That let's. I'm not going to bore you with all of the whole length of the commercials, but that gives you an idea of some of what was